I just want to start off by obviously saying that my name's Clare, and I've worked for Dogs Trust now for 14 years. I've been very honoured and very lucky to work on a lot of interesting projects during my time with Dogs Trust, most of them involving supporting vulnerable and homeless dog owners. And just recently we've become involved in a dog training initiative over the last few years, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today, about our involvement in an exciting programme that only is providing the dogs in our shelters with a second chance, but is also providing offenders with a second chance. And just following off from what Jane has been speaking about, she's been very much dealing with the young offenders themselves and the outcomes for young offenders. And their programmes really are classroom-based, using responsible dog ownership. And a lot of the themes that we're dealing with through these programmes are exactly the same, but we're dealing with them in the ways that we're actually taking dogs into prisons to do that. So it's slightly different in that respect. So my aim today is to provide you with an overview of prison dog training programmes, explain how we're involved in these programmes, to look at how they can help and rehabilitate to rehome shelter dogs, and just really briefly discuss the considerations when setting up these schemes. So what are prison dog training programmes? Well, some of you today probably will have heard of training programmes taking place in America. They've been well established in the USA for over 30 years now. They also run in Canada, and there are a couple of programmes in Europe, but they're not that common and haven't been heard of so much in the UK. Just to give you a bit of history, because it's kind of really important that everyone is aware of how they were set up and who was the founder. An extraordinary woman called Pauline Quinn, Sister Pauline Quinn. She's now a 70-year-old nun, but she's been responsible for setting up 41 programmes in America and across the UK. And she came about putting together these programmes from her own experiences. Unfortunately, she grew up on the streets herself, and she said that it was down to a dog that actually saved her life. And she feels that, believes that in helping others, herself helps people heal. But the main aim for these programmes is, for the dogs anyway, is to train the dogs really from our point of view here today for their rehoming access, and also to increase their adoptability. The main aims, and a bit like Jane has said earlier, is for the prisoners or the offenders, is to improve their skills, employability eventually, to reduce their reoffending, and obviously for long-term offenders to improve their behaviour within a prison environment. There are lots of different types of programmes. The one that I'm going to speak to you about today that we're involved in is more a basic training and obedience programme. But in America, they have various different programs, probably more common within their programs for dogs to actually be living in the prison with the prisoners. That's in actually specially adapted dormitory style accommodation, or actually in the prisoner cells, sort of living within the crates. The programs themselves can go from 8 weeks to 12 weeks for just general obedience and positive association training for the dogs, and the idea being that they go back to the rescue centre and they're adopted. Some of these programs have evolved so much that they actually have their own rescue centres within the prison, so that prisoners can learn all of the aspects about rehoming, and dogs are rehomed directly from the prison. There are assistance dog programs, which are probably more common now, and these are the ones where dogs actually live in the prison. And we're not just dealing with dogs as well in terms of these training programs. In America, they're so well established that some of the prisons have feral cat colonies that have moved in, and they're dealing with horses as well. So they're quite specific, but also they're quite varied. So just to give you a bit of background, really, because I'm sure that you'll all be aware or have heard at one time of animal-assisted intervention, or AAI. Some of you probably may have heard of animal-assisted therapies. But most of these programs and the programs that we're talking today are based on that concept in one way or another. And as we know, AAI or AAT are terms used when a program or an intervention includes animals in the rehabilitation and social care of people. We're probably more familiar, especially I know we are in the UK, with an organisation called Pets as Therapy. And actually they're quite well established in some prisons within the UK, or you might know them as visiting dog programmes. But obviously most of us here know the benefits of those. They benefit the elderly in hospital, in nursing homes, adults and children with learning disabilities. And they basically benefit humans by reducing anxiety, improving their self-esteem and social skills, which is particularly important, and I'll go on to talk about with the prison programs that we're dealing with young offenders, and reducing depression and helping people build and maintain social relationships, which for a lot of the boys that we're dealing with and young offenders is especially important. So moving on to the benefits. With animal-assisted therapies, obviously the benefits for humans are enormous, and there are obviously overall benefits for the dogs and the animals involved. But the difference with dog training programs to date and the ones that we've been involved in is there are very, very clear benefits for the dogs involved. So they're not just a vehicle for the therapy and the rehabilitation of humans involved in these projects. There are obviously benefits for the dogs involved. In the cases of the programs that I'm going to talk about today, the dogs themselves benefit from additional training. They develop socialisation from the handler contact. And most importantly, and I'm sure everybody will be familiar with this, is that it's very important for them to spend time away from a kennel environment, especially if they're stressed dogs. So just overviewing really now that I've given you a brief history of dog programs and looked at the main benefits, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our experience at Dogs Trust of being involved in these dog training programs. And to date, over the last 3 years, the main way that we've been involved is through supporting the Pause for Progress programme. So that's an animal-assisted intervention for male young offenders at a prison in Scotland. And we've also most recently been developing our new dog training initiative with an adult prison in the UK, which I'll briefly touch on. So the Pause for Progress programme was set up 3 years ago by Stirling University, a PhD student there, in conjunction with the Scottish Prison Service and ourselves. It's based on the format of an American program, a very well-established American program that many people probably would have heard of, called Project Pooch, which was set up in the early 90s. It's probably one of the leading young offender format for training programs across the world. And the way that it runs now is that dogs from our rehoming centre in Glasgow are taken to the prison in Scotland to be trained by the young offenders 3 mornings a week. This is just a quick picture there of to give you an idea of those of you who haven't been to our rehoming centres. This is our Glasgow rehoming centre where the dogs come from, and just at the bottom there is Polmont Young Offenders Institution. Actually, quite interestingly, from these shots and aerial shots, the prison and our rehoming centres look quite similar. That's actually from a good thing. So in terms of selecting dogs, I've said that we take the dogs from our rehoming centre, they go into a prison environment. But one of the most important things about this programme, and one of the things that I'm asked a lot, is how do you select the dogs? We have lots of dogs in our rehoming centre, but what we have to do to make this programme a success, and also bearing in mind the partnership and the bonds that are established between the young offenders very quickly with the dogs, is making sure that we get the right dogs. So we really have to consider the welfare and the behaviour of those dogs against the benefits that they will gain overall from being part of this programme. So when we're looking at dogs, obviously there are probably lots and lots of dogs in our centres that we'd like to take, but the ones in particular that we're looking at are those that are finding it hard to cope in kennels, and dogs that get kennel stress, which I'm sure, again, you all have experience of, is quite common. And another behaviour that we're looking for overall is nervous dogs and dogs that are lacking in confidence. And normally that comes from, obviously, inadequate socialisation. And probably most common is those dogs that are lacking in basic training, because it might well be really just basic training, so jumping up, sort of door introductions, not being, having no recall, those basic things within the program that we work with, they work on those and they're successful. So, and these are the things that for the dogs are really important, because an adopter coming into our rehoming centre is looking for a well-mannered dog that they can bring into their home with their family. So actually, we're not always looking for complex behaviours to work on with these dogs. It's actually really important, and because of the intense socialisation and training they get, we can work on the really basic training very quickly and get them up to standard. But we also have to consider different aspects, because we're taking these dogs into a prison environment. And from our experience, obviously, we know that they have to be transported to get to the prison there and back. So, twice a day within 4 hours. We take 6 to 7 dogs. So they have to be comfortable being in a van with other dogs for that period of time. And also whether or not they're going to be able to cope in that environment. The way the dogs are trained is in a group training environment, so they have to be comfortable to be around other dogs, quite close quarters, obviously with a small group of people. There are distractions at the prison. It can be quite ominous first time you go, but then you get used to it. So they're things that for us we have to take really seriously. So we don't take dogs that couldn't deal with that and all the environmental factors, and we don't definitely take dogs with a history of persistent or excessive fears. So here's just a few of our canine students that have passed their 10-week course. As you can see, there's a lot of Staffordshire Bull Terrier crosses on there, which the boys are fairly keen on. We've got a little husky in there. So the training format at Pause for Progress is a 10-week programme for 6 new prisoners. They're paired up with dogs from the rehoming centres I've just discussed after we've selected them. There's also a peer mentor programme, which I'll talk about very briefly in a second, but I just wanted to cover that the training that we do is based on the Association of Pet Dog Trainers Good Companion Award. So that award is achievable for the dogs using positive reinforcement within the 8 weeks that they're actually at the prison. So for the first week, the dogs don't attend the prison. The boys have lots of lessons, theory sessions with our dog trainer on reading dog body language, dog safety, responsible dog ownership, and they're introduced to the trainer's dogs. The dogs appear sort of on the second week through to week 9. So these practical training sessions take place in the morning, but I just wanted to say, it's quite important if anyone's wondering, is that the dogs during this time are still available for rehoming. The way that our rehoming centres work is they're open to the public in the afternoon. So they come back in the afternoon, they're settled into their kennels, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we advertise this. So they are up for adoption during that time. The sessions themselves take place 3 mornings a week with the boys, and then when the dogs aren't there, the boys are obviously taking part in educational sessions and workshops and having visits from other animal welfare organisations on the vocational opportunities that they may be able to be involved in post their intervention. They're very similar to what Jane talked about earlier, so I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of those, but obviously you can understand that it's important that you have a comprehensive and cohesive project, that you're not just taking the dogs in for training 3 mornings a week. You're actually tying that into all the theory behind what they're doing. And they're also doing a lot of work in relation to promoting the dogs, because a large part and one of the main focuses for us for building their confidence and their self-esteem whilst getting through this programme is that ultimately their main aim, and they take this very seriously, is to get these dogs rehomed. And Jane talked about competitiveness earlier. The boys get very competitive over wanting to ensure that their dogs are rehomed. I'm just going to briefly click through some of the elements here of the APDT, Association of Pet Dog Good Companion Award, and you can see some of the dogs in action here. Unfortunately, we can't take any film at the prison, so I do have a little film at the end for you from some of the American prison programs. Agility comes at the end, and we have a big open day at the end when they all graduate their APDT, and they get certificates and they get to do a bit of agility there. And then also, aside from the dog training aspect, when they're trained in a group training format, they spend some time inside sort of an area that we have that's all been kitted out for training. They have little individual areas, and they have some downtime with their handlers, which is really important because they're trying to establish a bond with these dogs. Remember, the dogs aren't living there with them, so this is as important as the training. And it enables that relationship to bond. They get to do a bit of trick training here. You see one of these dogs here on his skateboard. That is excessive advanced training. And bed training, which obviously bed training is very important, and weighing and grooming. And weighing and grooming and all these different aspects tie very much into what Jane said earlier. So the boys on this course, they are obtaining a lot of qualifications in English, literacy, personal development. So all the elements of this, weighing, grooming the dog, all count towards those qualifications. So I spoke earlier about the dogs coming from the rehoming centre. And one of the things that we decided very early on when we were being part of this programme was about promotion. As you can imagine, when you start talking about taking dogs into prison, especially, as I said, they're not well established in the UK, people start asking questions whether it's the right thing to do. I hope after our presentations today that Jane and I have convinced you that it has huge benefits, but we do obviously have to make decisions about how we're going to promote this. But we felt that people would really understand what we were trying to do here, connecting with the local community and looking at the benefits for both the dogs and the boys. So we do promote it quite heavily in our local rehoming centre. On the left there you can see a photograph of one of the presentations stand tables that we have in the rehoming centre reception. And we make people aware of that. And on there is lots of information, publications that the boys have put together themselves. They do this in their downtime, in their classroom sessions, photographs, how well the dogs are doing on the programme, some of their specialities with their training. And we put posters up on the right-hand side there on their kennels, just to say, I am a participant in Pause for Progress, and I will achieve the APD Good Companion, and that will benefit you as my potential new adopter. And very quickly, I just want to look at the promotion points of view from the media. Obviously, this has attracted quite a lot of attention, being one of the few programmes to date. We have had quite a lot of coverage there in the local BBC, the National Guardian, and in lots of dog newspapers, and we're quite lucky in that respect. But again, it's something that we have to be clear on the messages that we want to get across with media, and we have to be careful that we're not getting the wrong messages from sensationalist media in these types of situations. So just to bring it to life, really, I just wanted to tell you about Keita. So apart from being a very pretty girl, she's a 2-year-old crossbreed. She came into Dogs Trust Glasgow as a stray, so that's quite common for us, and that we won't have any history on her. She's very avoidant, or was very avoidant of people, and nervous of very new situations. And we obviously take that to being a lack of adequate socialisation and stability in her early life. However, within 2 weeks she was rehomed. But then she was returned to us due to severe anxiety and separation anxiety. But we looked at her and we thought, okay, she could be perfect because she's obviously rehomable. She went within 2 weeks, but there are things that we need to work on. And if it's socialisation, then there are clear outcomes from her, from being able to spend time out of the kennel setting and with a handler, with one-on-one human contact, and getting used to being in new situations with dogs in small groups and with people, but on a consistent basis. So we took her onto the programme, and here she is with her handler, legs only of the handler, I'm afraid. That's prison policy. So she was working within the APDT on building her confidence, able to approach people, walking calmly on the lead in her focus. And one of the things that everybody comments on when they come and look at these sessions is the focus that the dogs have with the boys, that they really work on. And it's especially important because from that focus, the boys can then take the training to new heights. And they really, really have just an amazing bond, which they establish very, very quickly. So she went flying through her 8-week ABD course. She is now calmer and happier around people. She's much more responsive to commands, and she's much more confident in situations. She's not completely all the way there, but she's a much more rehomeable dog. And most importantly for us, this has led to Keita being rehomed. So she's been in a new home since April, and you'll see here that she's now been rehomed with her buddy Barney, and I think she looks like she's in control of the situation here. She settled in very quickly, but one of the things about this story in particular is that her new owner could see, I'd seen her before and after the program, the benefits that Keita had from being part of this program. And she is really responsive and backing of what we're trying to do, especially in relation to the boys. And Keita's handler, she's been in contact via ourselves to give him lots of updates about how Keita's doing. So from our point of view, it really goes to show you that we do have the backing from the local community, and people who are adopting these dogs think it's absolutely fantastic. They just go around saying that my dog's been involved in this program. So just rounding up for the Pause for Progress program, and as I said, I haven't really gone into the human outcomes here. There are a lot, and unfortunately I don't have enough time today, but I'm around if anyone wants to talk to me more about what the boys have got out of this program. But the results for the dogs, obviously, which is our aspect in this, is over the last 3 years, 138 of the dogs have taken part from our rehoming centre, and 87% have now been rehomed. 54 of these dogs have passed the APD Good Companion. Actually, one of them has now passed the Advanced Good Companion Award, which is a first for us. Welfare-wise, because obviously APDT is a source of training and behaviour outcomes, the welfare is something that I mentioned earlier on that we're interested in, and I'll talk slightly more about that in a second. But the preliminary results from the PhD that's going on at the moment show that the welfare, which we're looking at, is being positively affected, the dogs as well, and that's something that we need to consider. And as importantly, the staff at the rehoming centre have seen a vast improvement in the dogs that have been involved at the centre as well as at the prison, because I think the theory was that whilst they were with their handlers, we would see these behaviours being positive, but it might not transcend and go through to the kennel environment. So it's positive all around. And here we have just a little bit of feedback from the Chief Inspector of Prisons in Scotland, saying that Pause for Progress has been inspirational. And from one of the students there, a bit like Jane's story, it's confidence building. They're very positive about the programme. So just to finish off very quickly, this Pause for Progress is a project that we've been involved in, so we're one of the main partners. But moving forward, and because of the partnership we've had, we're now getting quite a lot of interest from prisons across the UK. So in order to move forward sort of in the right way, we've decided to set up a research pilot so we can look more closely at the welfare outcomes for our dogs. And there's lots of anecdotal outcomes, and we can see the training and behaviour outcomes. But before we move forward, we really want to look at the evidence that the welfare isn't being compromised of the dogs as being part of this intervention. So at the moment, I'm planning a project with an adult male offender prison. So we're talking about adults this time, moving on from young offenders, similar to some of the programs in America. The training format will be quite similar, but we're going to do it on a more intensive basis. So there'll be 4-week training for the dogs. The dogs won't be available for rehoming within the 4 weeks, but they will be able to be booked. So they'll be on offer, and they'll be ready after 4 weeks. So they have their APDT, which we see as being a success. And so we hope within the 12-month pilot to get at least 24 prisoners through, and then our aim is to look at that, the outcomes of those, and then from that plan on how we're going to take these prison dog training programs forward, because it's quite evident from our point of view that there's lots of scope there with lots of different types of projects that will obviously help our dogs and rehabilitate our dogs, but we need to be doing it in the right way. And very quickly, and I know none of you are probably sitting there immediately immediately thinking I want to set one of these up right now, but I just wanted to, for those of you that might be, without being negative, just kind of very quickly go through some of the basics and the considerations that you need to think about. I mean, I would guess that some of you here today already have therapy dog schemes going, but it's something, if you don't, that you'd probably want to look at first of all as a first step. Moving on from that, then you obviously need to consider what you want from this program and what the prison wants, because very often they're not always the same thing. You need to look at the costs involved and the time involved. And we've talked about media. It's very important because the media will be interested. And obviously you need to look at the operational, the impact on the rehoming centre. Our rehoming centres have very well established patterns of working, times, routines, and these projects coming in, although they benefit the dogs, they have to be discussed and thought out in a lot of detail. And one of the biggest things overall that we've learned from this is obviously working with prisons, security, safety, and all the considerations around that, clearance. These things can take long periods of time. So I just wanted to finish, although I've gone back one too far, if I can, with a clip. Bear with me 1 second. It was in my presentation, but it's disappeared. Sorry about that. So, as the projects aren't really established at the moment within the UK, I'm just going to show you a quick clip here of some of the projects that have been established in America, just to give you an idea of how they're working, and they're working so well in giving dogs a second chance.
Don't give up. It's just the weight of the world. When your heart's heavy, I will lift it for you. Don't give up, because you want to be heard. If silence keeps you, I will break it for you. Everybody wants to be understood. Well, I can hear you. Everybody wants to be loved. Don't give up, because you are loved. Don't give up. It's just the hurt that you hide. When you're lost inside, I'll be there to find you. Don't give up, because you want to burn bright. If darkness blinds you, I will shine to guide you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time today.